Welcome everyone to week 5 of the Discord progression series. Having slogged through 4 weeks of the DM era, which I think thus far has proven to be the disillusionment era rather than anything else, as we've all found out that old Yu-Gi-Oh! Actually wasn't that good. As much as I love beat sticks and absolute blowout spells, I am looking forward to some added complexity. Got a big video for this week as we have quite a number of changes coming to our series. Just to walk you through where we're headed, we're going to go through the standings briefly, take a look at where everyone's shaken out so far through 4 weeks. We're going to take a look at our first ban list, which we completed today. Then we're going to talk a little bit about our shift to the best of 3 system, just to give a brief instructional on how that works. We'll talk through the wildcard system, which is going to be newly deployed this week and will be a go-forward part of our series. And finally, we'll get to the set reviews that you're used to for Magician's Force and Dark Crisis. And here we have the standings after 4 weeks of play. I would say generally we have pretty good grouping in the middle there with a couple outliers on the high and low end. Congrats to Mitch for really dominating the first section of our play. Now, I will say, I think the standings are a little misrepresentative. Honestly, the DM era gameplay really comes down to those power spell draws, so I think a lot of the games did amount to a coin flip. And I think more importantly, throughout the weeks, we've seen increased creativity in deck building, exploration of cards that I think in week 1 would not have been apparent to new players that they were worth taking a look at, and generally just an increase in the level of play. It's quite clear that y'all have had a chance to play test, that y'all are engaged with the content, and that's made it all that much more fun. So I look forward to seeing in another 4 weeks how these standings have shifted as the power level, both in the cards and in the player, continues to rise. With taps ringing out in my ear, yes, here we are, having arrived at the first ban list of our progression series. And I gotta say, I think it was overdue. If Delinquent Duo resolved against me one more time, I may have cried. Now, I just want to talk through quickly, and I'll get to the cards. I want to talk through the process because I think it overall worked very well. Thank you all for engaging with our universal ban process. I think we had originally posted something like 20 cards for review by the group, and at the end of the day, it amounted to 2 cards being banned in totality by all of the players, those being Delinquent Duo and Graceful Charity, 2 cards that I think are unquestionably unhealthy for the game. I know some folks were a little disappointed in the outcome of the universal ban system, but I think it functioned as intended. Folks had a chance to express opinions about the game that diverged, which I think is natural and an interesting part of any collection card game. Now, the additional bans that you see are all from our personal bans from those lowest in the standings, and while you would expect there to be 5, you'll see there's 4. One individual did choose to abstain from utilizing their ban, and although at first I hadn't considered that and was a little taken aback, I'm actually pretty impressed with the decision. I think it's a cool call to allow some of the power to remain in the format, and although I think 4 weeks from now there may be cards that remain grating in certain ways, I really respect that player's call to say, no, I'm having fun in the Wild Wild West, and I want to stay here a little longer with a couple extra 6-shooters on my hip. So no issues there. The bans we did receive, though, as I mentioned before, Delinquent Duo, Graceful Charity, Heavy Storm, Monster Reborn, Raigeki, and Snatch Steal. So finally doing away with some of those power spells I mentioned earlier in the video. Now we'll continue to improve our ban process, but I was happy with how it went this time, so I'm not expecting to make any changes. However, I would invite constructive criticism from you all as players, though I could maybe do with a little bit less of the complaining. Either way, I think as a result of these bans, there'll be fewer painful moments, fewer disappointing moments, and fewer game states where you felt like you couldn't play at all. And I think that's a good thing overall. So looking forward to not having Raigeki resolve against me ever again. As I mentioned at the top, this week we will be changing our standard match from best of 1 to best of 3. And I want to use my friendly Gogi Gagaga Karibo deck here to my right to illustrate how that might work. In a best of 3, you'll still do a coin flip before the first game. Whoever wins the coin flip in game 1 will get the choice of going first or second in games 1 and 3, while the player who loses the coin flip will have the choice to go first or second in game 2. Between games, you'll have the option of changing your deck with your sideboard. For example, here in my deck list, my Gagaga Gogi Karibo deck list. Right now, I have a pretty substantive Karibo package. If I queue into game one against my opponent and find that I simply can't win, I might choose to shuffle out all of those wonderful winged Karibo cards and shuffle in all of the Go Giga Gaga Gigo cards, because that will have a better chance to win. Yeah, I don't know. I got 3 Delinquent Dugo and 3 over Raigeki, man. I think I'm going to win anyways. But that's the idea. So between games, you'll have that opportunity to access your sideboard. You can shift cards in, shift cards out to your heart's content. The one piece here that I also want to call out is that you do not have to play a best of 3. You can choose to play a best of 1, and in fact, if your playing partner requests a best of 1 based on some life reason or otherwise, I encourage you to be gracious and go ahead and accept that. Now, please don't be a scumbag. Please don't request best of 1 just because you're playing, a cheese deck and you want to deploy it, steal your 1 win, and move on. This is really the type of thing where I want to accommodate for the concern that many have raised that best of 3s do take a good bit more time. And in a world where we're all busy, I recognize that that's not always going to be possible. That is really the purpose of retaining the BO1 option in the format. Y'all are probably thinking, well, that's not fair. In a BO3, I get to change my decks, and I might build differently for BO1 than I would for BO3. We have thought of a solution for that. So let's say your first game is a BO3 against your playing partner. That goes great. You manage to win, and you realize that some of the cards in your deck maybe weren't that good, or you sided into a couple cards in games 2 and 3 because they seem much better. Prior to your BO1, unlike how we had done this in the past, you will be able to alter your main deck in the sense that you will be able to switch in any cards that were in your side deck to the main deck prior to the BO1. Now, this does mean that deck checks will now need to include the side deck just to be sure that everything's on the up and up, but this will allow the flexibility where should your matches in the week vary in terms of their length, you don't end up in a place where you have a deck that fits well for one but not the other. So going forward, register deck lists with complete side decks, even if you don't use them, just for your own flexibility, and be courteous to your playing partners should they ask you to play a best of 1. I, however, am very excited to get into BO3 matches so I can stop getting sacked by cards I never could have prepared for or sided for perfectly but never got to access. Welcome to what is probably the most important and I think likely to be controversial rule change from this week's set. We, going forward, are going to institute a wild card system to allow players to build out some of the decks that they otherwise might have come up just frustratingly short of being able to play. Now, the concept here, as Ash and I were working towards establishing which sets we were going to go ahead and open throughout the series, we determined that the reprint sets are just simply too broken. They're stuff full of power staples. They have all of the monsters that really should feel good to pull as a high rarity earlier in the series. And just in general, we thought they would lead to collections being too similar, too comparable, playing pools of cards that were just too equal to manifest that kind of disparity that a progression series should have. So this wildcard system is meant to allow players to build reasonable versions of the decks that they're interested in, assuming they still get decent pulls and select pulls that will allow them to play the archetype. So in terms of the distribution, you're going to receive 5 common, 2 rare, 2 super rare, 1 ultra rare, and 1 secret rare, while they exist, wildcard for every 4 sets. Now you'll get them in bulk, and you'll have them until the next set is bestowed to the players, at which point they are just refreshed, but they're not cumulative. So it's use it or lose it in the sense that you have to use them within the 4 sets when you obtain them prior to the next delivery of wildcards. Now, you're able to use the wildcards on any set listed on Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro Deck that predates the set that we are opening, in the week. So this includes things like the McDonald's promo pack or some of the reprint sets you could go in and go ahead and pull cards from. Now, this will open up some consistency. It certainly is going to add power to our deck list generally. However, Ash and I went ahead and gave this a shot, right? We ran this in a few of the sets that we thought they would be the most broken in when some of the fundamental archetypes of the game release. And at the end of the day, we came away pretty wholly unimpressed, which is a good thing, right? So if you go into, say, Gladiator's Assault, one of the historically famous sets in Yu-Gi-Oh, and you want to play Gladiator Beast, the first true archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh that's very good, but you don't get very good pulls, these wild cards are not enough to build you a stellar deck. They'll build you a playable deck. You certainly will get to play Glad Beasts if you want, but you're not likely to top the table with them in any given week. Now, the last part of this that I want to speak to is that there are going to be uncraftable cards. There are cards that are so centralizing and so powerful that we feel players should really only have access to them if they're lucky enough to pull them in their sets. Now, I will say, we've made the call, this will not be a democratic process. Ash and I will review the sets each week and set the uncraftables, and it's really going to be a no questions asked type thing. We, I think, already have handled a lot of things democratically, and while I respect building a environment and a structure that is friendly to all of our players, this is one piece that I just don't have time to argue about. So uncraftables will be set week over week. Now, some folks have called out, those who know Yu-Gi-Oh well, next week is Invasion of Chaos, which has some of the most centralizing ultra rares and secret rares in the history of the game. For that reason, we will be not distributing any ultra or secret rare wild cards in the first set. So we're going to eliminate that Invasion of Chaos problem, not with uncraftables in the first week, but rather just by eliminating that distribution. So for week 5 and week 6, your wildcard distribution is 5 commons, 2 rares, and 2 super rares, which you can use on any set that we are opening this week or any set prior, or if you choose to use them next week, including next week's sets as well as, like I said, those promo packs that have occurred prior to this date in the timeline. So I do encourage you, if you have any questions about the wild cards, please do talk with Ash and I. We have spent legitimately multiple hours discussing the system at this point, trying to find a way to ensure folks can play the cards they're interested in without breaking the format altogether. Now, one last thing I want to note, just from a strategy perspective, is I encourage you, when you go out to figure out which cards you want to use wild cards on, I would do a quick search and see when those cards are reprinted, because yes, many of the cards that I bet many of you already have in your minds that you might want to use a wild card on will be reprinted in time. I don't want folks to end up in that painful situation where they blow their one ultra craft for a given set only to find out that it's reprinted super commonly 2 weeks later. So I encourage you, do a little bit of research before you blow your wild cards. I encourage you to use them to build fun decks. I encourage you to evade the pull of the staple cards and to, avoid crafting the hypothetical third Raigeki, right? Not a problem now, but you get my point. I hope this system works well, and here as well, Ash and I will be receptive to feedback. We're going to definitely keep this in place through week 8, but we would love to hear from you all as you use them, how they feel, how you feel it matters to your decks, whether you feel the numbers are right. Definitely looking for constructive feedback here, because this is something I think is very hard to get right, but will ultimately make the series more fun. All right, after a beast of a video, we finally arrived at the card review portion of the program. Now, notably, I'm not going to go through Tournament Pack 4, but if you got TP4 packs, go look at it. Those of you with wild cards, all of us, go look at it. There are good cards in TP4 that you ought to consider. And for those of you who won last week, I think it's probably the first time where winning has some legitimate value. That out of the way, though, let's start with Magician's Force. I want to call out the archetypes that broadly are included in Magician's Force. I'm not going to go through all the cards in these, but you should take a look at the packages writ large. When you pull your pulls, review to see how many of these you got, to see if they make sense for you, to see if you wanted a wild card to fill out any of these archetypes. And there's really 4 in Magician's Force to focus on. The first is Amazonas. This is a bit of a just hit you in the face deck, but there is some synergy between their cards that does get future support as well. The next is not a specific archetype in terms of like a named set of cards, but oh, do I think it is strong this week, and that is Burn, baby, Burn. The Burn cards have only gotten better. I think there was a critical mass of them arguably last week, and there definitely is more now. So take a look at everything that goes face, do the math in your head. I'm going to highlight a couple of the cards because they're so good in a minute, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if I was playing Burn this week. We've got the spell counter cards. A couple of these are good on their own. The archetype as a whole, I wouldn't say is great, but I'd definitely be interested to see someone play some in testing. Maybe it plays well in our format. I'm totally unsure on these, but there's a bunch of them with a ton of different interactions where you're leveraging spell counters to either expend to gain effects or amass to gain a huge effect multiple turns down the road. The last archetype is the XYZ or Union cards. These are pretty iconic from the anime. If you ever watched, X-Head Canon and the Y and Z guys as well. I do want to highlight here, you don't need to pull all of them. The just 2-guy fusions are pretty good. You don't require polymerization to go ahead and make them. And I think they're pretty strong. So if you get a good set of these, definitely consider them. I don't think they're a meme. Let's get into the individual cards, though. The first one being Breaker, the Magical Warrior. This is one of the spell counter cards that by himself is very good. He's a dark 4-star, 1600, 1000. On normal summon, you place one spell counter. You can only have one, but that kind of doesn't matter. You get 300 attack, so he's a 1900 beater at base, but you can remove a spell and Dust Tornado a spell and trap on the field, including face-up spell and traps as well. That's really good. Now, it's not a quick effect. You can only do it on your turn, but you summon this guy, you see your opponent's got a back row, you go through the machination of placing your spell counter, removing it, you pop it, you call it a day. That's just generically very, very powerful. The next card I want to highlight is one of the cuter but more devious cards in the set, and that is Desk Koala, which is a dark 3-star beast with a flip effect. The stats really don't matter here. The flip effect is inflict 400 damage to your opponent for each card in their hand. Now, you'll note that generally you're not going to get this above 2400, but you can play 3 of these guys. It's still hard to special summon. Hands get full. We've seen a ton of players playing big, slow control decks, and you're just like, boom, koala dog, eucalyptus dick. Next one's going to be Magical Scientist. This is a card that I cannot explain in English words how broken it is. It only gets more broken as the game goes on. If it makes it past the next ban list, I can confirm that I will not have been in the bottom 5. It is really fun, though, so I'd maybe understand it. Magical Scientist is a 1-star spellcaster with irrelevant stats that says, pay 1,000 life points to special summon 1 level 6 or lower fusion monster from your extra deck in face-up attack or defense position. Now, that fusion monster can't attack, and it's returned to the extra deck at the end of the turn, but, that doesn't matter, right? When we get to the Xyz era, to the, Synchro era, to the time where you can take cards and make other cards with them, yeah, this is just so broken. It is indescribable. You'll notice there's no once per turn on this card. Thanks, Konami. Next up is Royal Magical Library. This card seems innocuous, but it can be a problem, right? So stats are irrelevant. It's 4-star light, so you can normal summon it, and that's really all that matters. Each time a spell card is activated, place 1 spell counter on this card when that spell resolves. Max 3. Once you get 3 on there, expend them, draw a card. There are decks that play a lot of spells. Those decks want to draw a lot of cards. Those decks need a librarian. Will that be you? Next one is Tribe Infecting Virus. This is a great counter to a lot of the archetypal stuff that I think people have started to play, right? I think Konami properly recognized that if you get rolling with, say, dragons or warriors or fiends, that can be really good, and it can be hard to stop that flood, especially now in our format where we've taken Raigeki out to pasture. Slowing down some of these wide boards is going to get harder, and I think Tribe Infecting Virus is one way to do that. 4-star water and aqua, 1600 1000, so not irrelevant stats, but with a relevant effect, that being discard 1 card from your hand and declare 1 type of monster. Destroy all face-up monsters of the declared type on the field. Oh, you're playing fiends? No, you're not. See you in the graveyard, dog. Oh, you thought that, I don't know, all of those beasts in the Earth archetype were really good? Yeah, no, sit. Great card. We're on to the spells then. The first being Kaiser Colosseum. Mucho texto, but I promise this card's quite good. It reads, if there is one or more monsters on the field of the controller of this card, his or her opponent cannot place a monster on the field if his or her number of monsters would exceed the number of monsters that are on the field of this card's controller. The cards that are already on the field before this card's activation are unaffected by this effect. So simplified, I play Kaiser Colosseum. I've got one guy on the field. You get to keep the guys as my opponent you have on the field, but you can't summon any monsters if it would go beyond one. Let's say my one is like some toxic flippable card like Swarm of Scarabs or something, and you can't really do anything about it. Kaiser Colosseum. Really good, only gets better with time. Oh yeah, my body is a machine that turns my body into a shield, which turns your spell card into trash. So my body as a shield is, funnily enough, the first great Raigeki counter in the week that we've banned Raigeki. So this spell reads, when your opponent activates a spell or trap card or monster effect that would destroy a monster on the field, pay 15, negate the activation, and destroy it. This is mostly used for spell cards, right? I mean, like Black Hole. Raigeki, you'll notice it doesn't have any of those annoying text lines like if it only targets one monster or if it only destroy one monster. None of that. If a monster is going to get destroyed on the field, boom, my body's a shield, negate, moving on. Cards generically really, really strong, and the life points are very little to pay for what is a great effect. Next one up is Wave Motion Cannon, possibly the most toxic card in the format. I shouldn't say that. It's this amongst the other burn cards that this just gets brutal. And I think I even saw some decks last week with folks experimenting with a comparable style effect that was just way worse than Wave Motion Cannon. Wave Motion Cannon reads, during your main phase, you can send this card face up to the graveyard. Inflict 1,000 damage to your opponent for each of your standby phases that have passed since this card was activated. Right, so you play it on main one, your turn ends, goes to your opponent's turn, you're playing a bunch of stall bullshit, you're making sure you never take any damage, you get to your standby phase, you've got one essentially counter on this card, one standby's gone by. It's going to do 1,000. 2 turns, 2,000, 3, 4, right? Do the math. The number's getting big, and all you got to do is stall and make your opponent not play the game. Many of you have played decks that do that. This card, auto-include in all of those style decks. Speaking of which, here is Rivalry of Warlords. This one isn't as good now, but I call it out because it only gets better as time goes on. This is a trap that reads, each player can only control one type of monster, send all other face-up monsters they control to the graveyard. Now, kind of contrary to Tribe Infecting Virus that we saw earlier, this deck is great for archetypal decks, right? You know you're only playing Fiends. You're not splashing anything else. You're not, chucking some Among Uses in there for fun. But your opponent might be, and then you just eliminate their ability to summon anything else. Perhaps you get them pinned with a real weak one-off monster in their deck. They're running Man-Eater Beast in their Fiend deck or something just for the value that it currently represents. It's on the field, it's flip face up, it can't do anything. Rivalry of Warlords, they can't summon anything else, short of tributing until they get rid of that Man-Eater bug. So great card, might not be playable this week, but definitely one you want to snake 3 of. And then, burn, baby burn, you got your pandas, and now you got your koalas. We'll see the panda in a sec. And now you got Secret Barrel, which reads, inflict 200 damage to your opponent for each card in their hand and for each card they control. Boy, this can add up, and you can play a couple of them, I believe. I'll have to check the limited list. But I think it might be just one. Either way, this is great. This will be the first card where it's really important how we resolve chains, right? You'll recall that cards don't leave the field till they resolve. So let's say you've built up a 5-card chain where you've activated all your burn cards and you activate Secret Barrel last, after all your opponent's chained effects. This will still count all those cards they've activated because they won't have yet left the field. So a little bit of skill expression, but a card that just deals so much damage, and with that burn pile ever growing, it's good. Last one in the set then is Thunder of Ruler, and this goes to that stall concern that I mentioned earlier, and we're going to see another card in a bit that makes stall a bit better and a bit more definite, and that is Thunder of Ruler. It's not an astoundingly powerful card, but in a low power format where essentially passing a turn might be a really big deal, this card's great. So Thunder of Ruler reads, during your opponent's standby phase, notably you have to do it in standby phase, you can activate this card. There is no battle phase this turn. So it's not as good as cards that come later in the day where you can kill the battle phase in the battle phase, where you might get an opponent to overcommit in the main phase, and then, surprise, you don't get to do anything in terms of damage. This is a little worse than that in that you have to declare in the standby, but it just guarantees a turn, right? Short of effect damage, short of the burn damage, this gives you another turn. And then another one gives you another turn. And then another one gives you another turn. Yeah. See how that might be good with, I don't know, wave motion cannon? That's enough Magician's Force, though. Here we are now with Dark Crisis. The archetypes of which are a little bit less impressive, right? So, you have Archfiends. I know some folks are really excited about the Archfiends. They're not bad, don't get me wrong. But in a format where the Archfiends text reads hurt yourself and burn is the probable best deck, they don't line up super well. The next archetype is the Dark Scorpions. For those of you who pulled Don Zalug, this is his gang of pals, and they all have comparable effects. When you hit your opponent for direct damage via battle, you trigger one of two effects. They're pretty okay. They have a little bit of support. There's some spells and traps. Go ahead and take a read of all of them. I don't think this one's playable, but I'd love to see it in test. And then the last one is the Panda Burn deck that I mentioned earlier. Burn, baby, burn. And this time with a cuddly koala and a cuddly panda. We're going to see him in a second. But yeah, read the burn cards. Just read the burn cards. Not a burn card, though, to start off with, that being DD Warrior Lady. This is just a generically good monster that's good for a good while, just super efficient, right? 4-star light warrior, so it attacks into some of those existing warrior builds that I think some of us have hiding in the wings. Stats 1500, 1600, not bad, very relevant, but with a super relevant effect again. After damage calc, so notably if you fight a monster with more attack, this card does get destroyed because damage calc occurs. When this card battles an opponent's monster, you can banish that monster and banish this card. So it would have been destroyed, but it gets banished. You do take the damage, though. The important part here, right, is like your opponent has blue eyes on the field, and yeah, you run DD Warrior Lady into it, so you take 1500, but you banish the blue eyes. That's good. 1-for-1 removal, really good for a card that still gets to play as a normal monster, when you choose to. It's very good. Very good card. Oh, my boy, the angriest of pandas, the Gyaku Girei Panda, the center of Panda Burn. This being a beast, attack 800, gonna grow. Relevant effect, increase the attack of this card by 500 points for each monster on your opponent's side of the field. When this card attacks with an attack that is higher than the defense of your opponent's defense position monster, inflict the difference as battle damage to your opponent's life points. Okay, so it's piercing, right? It's trample for you Magic players out there. That doesn't sound that good on its face, right? That doesn't seem that crazy. At best, your opponent's going to have 2 monsters. You make it an 1800. Maybe you get 200 to damage in. You're still below Gravekeeper's spot. Not that good. What if I told you there was a card that we were going to see in a sec that gives your opponent 3 monsters with 0 defense that this guy can immediately attack into, guaranteeing 2300 damage for a normal summon under Gravity Bind? Yeah, just trust me on the Panda, okay? Kaiser Glider, this is just a good card, a generic good card. It's going in the dragon decks. There's a couple of other generic dragons that I didn't include because y'all can read, right? They're not super fancy. But Kaiser Glider, I think, just immediately becomes the best 1 tribute summon in the game, right? So 6 stars, so it just costs 1 tribute, 2400 attack, 2200 defense, good stats, right? Red Eyes Black Dragon, but a great effect. Can't be destroyed by a monster with the same attack if they battle. That's not really relevant. I don't know how often it's going to come up. Gives you a little protection, I guess. It makes your 2400, effectively a little bit bigger. Important parts of the second line. If this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, notably just destroyed, not by battle, not specifically by spell, any kind of destruction that sends it to the graveyard, target a monster on the field, return it to the hand. Just a lot of value. A guy that you slap down for a tribute that becomes a problem, right? He kind of goes 2 for 1, right? Almost always. That's pretty good. Last monster then is Tsukuyomi, another just generically good card. Dark 4-star, spellcaster 1100, 1400, not super relevant stats. Notably a spirit monster, probably the first playable one of those. It can't be special summoned, right? You got to normal this chick. When it's normal, though, you get to Book of Moon, a monster. That's good. That's just generically good. It's hard to describe how good it is, but it just kind of is. Notably, this isn't enemy monsters, so you can flip your own flip effect monsters. That's quite good, right? So let's say your flip effect, your Gravekeeper Spy gets attacked. It doesn't die, but it flips face up in defense position. You, in your main phase on the next turn, can play Tsukiyomi, targeting your Gravekeeper Spy, flip it face down. Then, because it wasn't summoned this turn, you can manually flip it face up. Now you've summoned another Gravekeeper, you're swarming the board, it's going crazy, and this thing returns to hand at the end of the turn, so you don't have to worry about the meager battle stats. You're getting to do this over and over again. It's recursive, it's value generating, it's way better than the text reads on its own. Make sure you pick a couple of these up if you can. Into the spells, and there's only one for Dark Crisis, and that is Final Countdown. Pay 2,000 life points, sucks, is what it is. However, after 20 turns have passed, counting the turn you activate it, so the turn you activated is turn 1, you win. Do I need to illuminate that further? You win. The duel's over. Obviously, stall cards make this possible. That's why I highlighted some of the stall earlier. You know there's other stall in the format, and if you can just hang on, especially with the lack of power spells, all of a sudden the power level is going to decrease. If you can just sit there and wall up behind Final Countdown for 20 turns, hey, bingo bango, you won. Now, obviously, this card can get sniped off the field in those 20 turns. It's not indestructible. It does sit on the field. It continues to exist. I believe. I'll have to double check that. But yeah, pretty good. Good card. Onto the traps then. Ojama Trio. This is the Panda card. Summon 3 Ojama tokens to your opponent's field. They have 1,000 defense. It's not 0, but that's kind of irrelevant, right? You're still gaining net damage on each of them, especially if you have multiple pandas or if your opponent has any other monsters. They can't be tributed, so they can't really do anything with them right now. There's not a great way to get them off the field other than destroy your own monster effects. And when they're destroyed, the controller takes an additional 300 damage. So you get over it with a panda, you get that piercing damage, you get 300 for each of them. Really good. Card becomes bad eventually when you can like turn them into things, right? You can turn them into 2-star Xyz, or way later in the game you can link them, but pretty good card. Sakuretsu Armor, just generic power, really straightforward. Opponent monster declares an attack, so the attack does not complete, like Mirror Force, declares an attack, target the attacking monster, destroy it. Just good. Just really good. Get 3. And finally, Skill Drain. This card sucks. I hate this card, but it's really good. It's really strong. Continuous spell. Activate by paying 1,000 LP. Who cares? Irrelevant. Negate the effects of all face-up monsters while they're on the field, right? You just turn the game into a beatdown. It's good. It's just really good. It just is really good. I don't know what to tell you, man. It's just really good. I hope no one gets this card. I hope there's a glitch. I hope the Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro deck fails. I hope there are no skill drains. I hope I never have to see it again. Frustrating card.